Hey everyone, it's Joe Kral with the Society of St. Sebastian, and again, welcome to Pro-Life University. This week we're going to focus on the Louisiana case that's going to be decided upon by the United States Supreme Court. In many respects, a lot of people thought it was going to be coming out this week. Doesn't look like that's going to be the case. It looks like it may come out on Monday. So we're going to take a little quick peek at this particular Louisiana law. Now, to some extent, I covered this some months ago in a previous video of mine. And again, I'm going to try to focus on some pertinent points that we need to know with respect to this law. A little bit of the history, a little bit about what the law does, and basically how it leads towards a culture of life. Now, one of the things that we need to know is what the law is specifically. That's a good basis in which to start off with, obviously. Basically, the law, just in a nutshell, just for, so everyday people can quickly understand what it is a mandate that requires abortionists to have admitting privileges to a nearby hospital. That sums it up very quickly. All right? I obviously am not going to go through it because I want to keep this video short. But nonetheless, that's basically what the law does. This is similar to what Texas did in 2013. That particular law went to the U.S. Supreme Court as well. And in 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court came down ruling against the Texas law, saying that it posed an undue burden. Now, there are some slight differences. Well, I shouldn't say slight. They're actually pretty significant differences when it comes to the circumstances that are surrounding the enforcement of this law and the implementation of this law and so forth. So let's just briefly talk about that real quick. So why does Louisiana law, or how does the Louisiana law in some ways differ with respect to circumstances when it comes to the Texas law? Well, when it comes to the Texas law, there's a certain requirement of numbers that that someone who has admitting privileges, he has to admit so many patients per year. Louisiana doesn't necessarily have that requirement under their rules for their medical doctors. Furthermore, when it comes to the issue of distance, Texas is obviously a very large state. If you were to take it from basically, the border of Louisiana and Texas all the way to El Paso, you're talking over 700 miles. That's quite a significant distance there. Louisiana doesn't have that particular issue when it comes to that sort of thing. And so as a result, in many respects, the distance requirements that are posed, because some clinics might refuse to either go by this law and close down or whatever. Nonetheless, the driving distance requirements would not nearly be as long for women to drive. And so there's some big differences here. In many respects, that was one of the critical things that you were dealing with respect to this Louisiana law. Louisiana also did something very interesting with respect to their argumentation of the law that Texas simply didn't do. They asserted that abortion clinics simply just don't have the right to basically bring a lawsuit on behalf of a woman because there's a conflict of interest. Now, obviously, just from an everyday standpoint, we can definitely see the conflict of interest. The simple fact is the abortion industry is in the business of selling abortions. So, the simple fact is that they want to keep a law as liberal as possible so they can sell more abortions, right? So, in many respects, that is another interesting fact about this particular case that wasn't raised with respect to the Texas case as well. Now that we know a little bit of the history of it, let's kind of talk about how this particular issue leads to a culture of life. Now, me speaking as a non-attorney, I can't necessarily get into the legal issues, obviously, that will be talked about, but I can certainly talk about some of the moral issues that are going on. One of the things that we fundamentally need to realize is that when Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton became the law of the land, in many respects, it kind of created a new thing with respect to the abortion industry. They essentially were unchecked at this point in time. They didn't necessarily have to adhere to certain standards that most doctors would have to adhere to. They don't have to necessarily adhere to the same types of laws that a lot of doctors have to adhere to as well. So it's interesting to note when we talk about this sort of thing, all right? So when it comes to most doctors that would have an outpatient sort of business, they do have to have admitting privileges to a nearby hospital. And the whole reason for this is to have that continuation of treatment. Obviously, with respect to abortion, that wasn't necessarily seen to be the case. In fact, in many respects, once the abortion was done, that was it. That's all he did. And if there was any problems that the woman was suffering, such as hemorrhaging or bleeding or any number of things, a perforated uterus, she was sent to a nearby hospital, and the abortionist wasn't involved anymore at that particular point. And so there's certainly an issue of a standard of care. And so when Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton became the law of the land, what we saw here at this point in time is a cut between what normal medical practitioners do and what abortionists do. And so we need to understand that the law is meant to limit this particular harm. So abortion on demand created many harms, all right? We got to remember, it creates several different specific types of harm, right? And that's an important thing to understand here. Yes, we are concerned about the unborn baby, but we also got to address the other various harms, and that gets into the idea of incrementalism as well. So one of the things that we see here is that it's limiting the specific harm when it comes to continuation of care. It comes to the subject of continuation of care. Here, in many respects, legislation such as this is righting that wrong, right? Is correcting that wrong and is saying, no, you have got to adhere to the normal medical standards that pretty much any doctor, if they were working in an outpatient surgical center, would have to follow when it comes to this sort of thing. Right, so it's righting that wrong. All right. The next thing that we really need to look at is how is this moving away, or rather, how's this moving the public away from a general acceptance of abortion on demand? So how is it moving the culture towards a culture of life? And I think in order to properly say this, all right, the purpose of the law in many ways kind of exposes the lie of the abortion industry. The ever-present lie that they want to say that it's a safe procedure. They try to argue that it's safer to get an abortion than it is to get a tooth pulled. Well, we know that is not correct. There are several risks that are involved with respect to getting an abortion done, and the women face these sorts of risks. And so in many respects, I think it exposes that lie to the public. And so this is one of the reasons why, for example, they try to challenge this sort of law, is because they don't want that lie exposed. They want the myth out there that abortion is safe. And that's just what it is, a myth. And obviously we as pro-life advocates want to expose that myth for what it is, a myth, and a dangerous myth at that. And so what it does is when it helps move this culture by exposing the myth, right, if you will, it shows that abortion is not nearly as safe as they've been making it out to be. Right? And so people begin to understand, maybe this isn't as safe as I thought it was. Maybe this is something that we need to really think about when it comes to getting this sort of thing done. Right? And again, helping move people away and keeping women safe. And again, just kind of thinking through here, the simple fact is if it isn't as safe, right, we know then it puts women at risk. And if it puts women at risk, in a way that is not good, then people begin to see, if you will, the danger of abortion in general. So in many ways, it's moving folks away from this idea that abortion is safe, because abortion just simply is not. There are many risks involved, including emotional and psychological risks, right? And the simple fact is that abortion not only has physical risks, but it even has psychological risks. So in many respects, people begin to see some of the problems that exist because of what abortion is and what it does and how it's performed and so forth. So the myth is exposed that it is no longer as safe as they make it out to be. And I think that's how, at least in my personal opinion as an ethicist, how it moves people towards a culture of life. Well, again, let's keep praying and hoping that this law is upheld and that Louisiana is able to enact it. I think it's important to keep those prayers going. And again, if you have any questions, write them down in the comments, and be sure to give us a big thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, be sure to do so. Anyway, I hope this video was informative for you this week. I hope you have a blessed weekend, and take care. God bless.